This is Literature and Pictures. I have BunkmastaB here with me. How are you doing?
What's up, buddy?
Shall we talk about the DMZ Compendium 1?
Let's talk about it because after we talk about this, I mean I suppose we're not streaming this, so we're not posting in real time, but yeah, after we talk about this, I think the video is just going to get taken down from YouTube, and there will not be an Enzuelo talk that will be posted afterwards.
Hey, I heard those big companies, especially Google, is a little bit more relaxed on the content and what we can and cannot discuss. So I think all things go.
I mean this is true, yeah. After content moderation and fact checking was like a big thing, and like, hey, maybe that thing that you're posting, and as maybe it's not real, maybe you saw that from a site that isn't true. They're like, no, you know what? That's fine. Just signal boost whatever fake story is out there. It's not our deal.
So based on a real story, let's first mention that we're only talking about Compendium 1. There's a Compendium 2 that is out of print and goes for crazy prices.
I did not realize that beforehand. Because I was looking at this, and as I was finishing, I was like, yeah, that's a compendium. They always have compendiums, and I was like, yeah, I wonder what the compendium to. Like, I wonder on IST, and I was like, oh, it's not on IST. That's weird. Yeah, and then on Amazon, it's like 200. Like the listing is 200 something dollars,
Yeah, I got this when it came out, 20 in the pandemic, 2020, 2021. I think it came out 2020.
which was also shocking to me because I had forgotten that DC had been doing compendiums that far back. Like I swear I remember Omar like talking about the DMZ compendium like 2 years ago or like last year. Like I just assumed that this was like widely in print.
And Compendium 2 that collects, so in overall there are 72 issues. Compendium 1 is 1 through 36. They're not numbered because those are like kind of mini series, mini arcs, I guess. And then Compendium 2 would include 37 through 72. That came out in 2022. I don't know why I didn't pick it up then, but yeah, by now it is going for crazy. Yeah, as you mentioned, $250 or so in resale.
I would say if it at this point, if you want to read the material from there, it would be cheaper to just buy a year of DC Infinite Ultra tier and just read it all through there.
So spoilers ahead for the first 36 issues. Where do we want to start? I want to start with Matty Roth.
Well, I figured that we would start with the beer that I selected to accompany DMZ. Going into this, I knew exactly what beer I wanted to do. And if anyone has read this recently, it should be pretty obvious. But much like supplies in the DMZ are very hard to find, I found it very difficult to find this beer, which should not have been. This is a beer that actually shows up in the series and shows up being dispersed by the character Wilson, who is a friend and ally to Matty, who, again, spoilers, he finds out later is actually a crime boss who ran the triads that was there. And he's sitting on a cache of Asian beer that is never named, but it's very clearly, and actually later in the book, and I'll see if I can flip through real quick. Um, you see a bottle that shows part of the name of this particular beer. I got Tsingtao. So one, I've had this beer sitting here the whole time. So this whole six pack
Warm now.
has been sitting here, much like in the DMZ. They have Wilson has all the beer he could want, but they don't have refrigeration, so they drink a lot of a warm beer. The other thing I didn't think about beforehand, but makes sense now. This is a Chinese beer. It is imported from China. This beer that I have, this regular six pack, cost more than the artisanal IPA locally sourced Great American Beer Fest winner that I'm going to show off when we do Ensuelo. This cost more for this cheap Chinese lager. And I couldn't find it until I went to
Why is that, Ben?
no reason. There's nothing going on in our global economic sphere that's affecting specifically Chinese products coming into this country, which coincidentally are all of them. Um, yeah, it's also a green label or a green bottle, which as a beer snob, I can tell you only blocks 40% of the light that comes in. The major determining factor for beer's off flavor skunk. If you ever had a beer that's skunked, that is one of the 5 acknowledged off flavors, is light pollution coming into it. And in this green bottle, I got a good whiff of it. This beer is skunked, but that's not going to stop me from drinking it. So here's to our friends in the DMZ. Once you get past the initial skunking, I like synced out pretty. I'd like to think of myself as an experienced beer person. I've done my first level Cicerone certification for beer. Like I worked at a brewery. I led tours and events. Like I'm a beer knower in general. So I feel like going into this, as soon as I opened that cap, I knew what to expect. But until you're in that experience, until you hit that drop site, you're going through and you see your entire, copter go down to an RPG. You see your team taken away from you, and you're whisked away into a site that you've only seen on the news and only very selected, sites and only very specifically fed news stories. You never really know what's happening. That's my segue for you.
You were exposed to the propaganda first, but now you're experiencing the real thing, just as Matty did. So the DMZ is the demilitarized zone, which is Manhattan, population 400,000, between the United States, who have retracted towards the east.
The major thing that sets this up, the whole reason there's a demilitarized zone, is this book takes place during a second American Civil War. So in this particular story, there's a DMZ between 2 fronts. There's the United States Army, which is the traditional forces, and then the rebel forces of the free states, which are going against them. There's different territory disputes. But the reason that there's a DMZ in the first place is because we are seeing a second American Civil War going on.
Yes, thank you. That's very important, because otherwise, why would the United States have left Manhattan? But yeah, we have the Lincoln Tunnel and I believe the Holland Tunnel, even though that's not mentioned, but especially at the Lincoln Tunnel towards New Jersey. You have the Free State sitting there. And then on the other side, is that Washington Bridge, Brooklyn Bridge? No, Washington Bridge, I believe, where the United States are basically having their front lines. And Matty is a young, aspiring journalist who's flying in with a way more experienced journalist and some troops.
Yeah, he starts actually just as an intern. He's not even a paid position there. He is an intern with Liberty News that's only there because his dad pulled some strings to get him on this particular team.
So he has an idea of what the DMZ is because he's been exposed to the propaganda he sees on TV, hears in the news. And that helicopter is shot down. I don't think we need to go through all the steps. If people are listening, they're probably aware of the book, but that's how it starts, right? Like
I also imagine if they're listening to the specific section that comes after that, you'll do your classic editing and we'll see the pages that coincide that I'm not going to do the work for, but I know you will.
Potentially. But he's dropped there or shot down. Everyone else is killed, and he is left by himself in the DMZ.
Wait, is everybody else killed?
And well, not everyone else. We later find out we are skipping ahead there. Okay, so not everyone.
We already said it's a spoiler stream.
We'll later find out that I believe Victor is his name.
Yeah, Victor Ferguson, I think is the it's the body of a journalist arc.
The a-hole journalist that doesn't want anyone to take his place. Not even an intern to be helpful or dickhead. He's later, or we find out he's later being kidnapped by the Free States But at that point, Matty is on his own and he runs into Z, who saves his life because everyone starts shooting at him because he's not a known person in that area. I believe they're outlining what blocks exactly, and anyone who lived in New York is probably way more familiar than we are. I've been to New York a handful of times, but I couldn't tell you all those streets, where they are, how they connect. But we have a map in here, so that helps a bit.
I'm a Boston guy. I went to New York exactly once. I was very, very lost, and then I went to Long Island, and that was my New York experience.
Now, I've been to New York a few times, but I don't need to remember street names because everyone is like 4 blocks down. And it's like, okay, you don't need to know what street number, and not even names, street number it is. But
Yeah, I went to Grand Central Station. I took the LIRR, and that was my New York experience.
that's fair. But he finds himself in a kind of like individually governed, like governed by individuals. Like there's no larger entity where everyone is on their own, including Z. And because she's known, he's protected by her presence. She kind of takes him under her wing. And that's how his journey starts. So he starts as this guy, green behind his ears, and being confronted with his perception and kind of de-illusioned a little bit right there off the start.
Yeah, so I think you kind of set the tone there. Some things I think might be worth mentioning. You talk about how Matty, his only understanding of the DMZ is through the propaganda that's gone out there. It's important to note that because the DMZ is exactly that, it's a demilitarized zone between the two forces. This is the first time that a journalist has actually gone in. And so, much like in any sort of war zone crisis, the news that's reported back is sort of the news that agency wants you to have. And so we see throughout this, there are signs on buildings that say things like the media is lying to you. And one of the things that I love about this story is sort of the human stories in between the moments of sort of catastrophe about how people are finding life and culture and beauty, all while, everything is going on. And you never hear about those things. But there's not really necessarily a chance because, to your point, if you aren't known in the DMZ, if you don't have someone that's vouching for you, this is a very dangerous place for you to be. And basically, Z, who is a former med student, who is now acting as the medic for this particular area, she finds him and being a medic, sees someone injured, comes and basically sees he's injured and helps attend to him. And at that point, she starts showing him around, and we get to sort of see the different areas of the DMZ with Matty as our ride along character, and that's where we're introduced to this world that's all going on there.
And she helps him establish himself. She introduces him to Wilson, but at some point he runs into other folks as well, like the ghosts. That story came fairly early, I believe, even before he meets Wilson, I believe. We have the ghosts.
I'm kind of surprised.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if that's out of order. Because
that happened.
That's how it came out.
Yeah. So this was a book. When you send this to me, I didn't know what you were sending me. You said basically, I know that you've heard of this book. I just don't know if you own it. And I was like, how do you know if I've heard of this book? And I opened it up and I was like, oh, I actually was reading this in singles when it first came out. And it's this very particular moment in my life where I recall I was reading this. I was pulling it from my local comic shop when I was a freshman in undergrad. I was going to Earth Prime Comics on Church Street in Burlington. Shout out to my home state of Vermont. And I remember, the first issue came out, and at that point, Vertigo, which is what this was originally published on, was just coming out. Like anytime Vertigo had a new series, I was buying like that first issue. And this is one that I stuck with for a while. And it brought back a lot of memories of reading through there. And of course, at that point, at the time that this came out originally, this was being written as sort of a counterpoint to the Iraq war that was going on under George W. Bush and the ensuing occupation that happened after that, and the division that we were feeling at that point. And it felt very of the time. And it was kind of one of those books at the time. It's just like, I wonder how this will hold up over time, because it's so very much this point in history. And then you go out and you send it to me now, and I'm just like, oh, no, there will never not be a time that this is pertinent, because anywhere you look, you can find analogs, whether we're looking at the West Bank in Palestine, what's going on there with the fight with the Israeli army, whether we look at the division that's going on in the United States, whether we look at Venezuela or South Korea. We just see what happened there with their leader, who basically refused to leave office. His supporters, who were surrounding his house, not letting advancing forces come in. This book was written about a very particular time in history, and yet it will never not be resonant with something else that's going on.
And I also love that they picked New York City. First, I was like, again, this came out over like a 7-year stretch, 2005 to 2012. But it was like, of course, in New York, always the big cities. But then if you look at history, those conflicts have mostly played out in the big cities, whether it's in Yugoslavia, whether you have like Sarajevo, Belgrade, like any bigger conflict plays out in the biggest city or capitals, because that's what the government is. Someone wants to take that spot. In this case, it doesn't matter if Washington D.C. is that place, or here in New York City. New York City has that relevance as well, and kind of how it's explained with the unique geography. It makes sense as well. You have only the bridges separating, so it makes sense that that's where you make the cut, where the rivers are. Kind of how natural geography shaped countries' borders. Like you have a river, that's usually the border, and in Europe it is, I believe, in towards the north as well. In some areas in the US as well, but it kind of makes sense. Like, yes, of course, a conflict like this would play out in New York City, and not somewhere in Montana or wherever else. Like,
but Montana is actually where the Free State started. But I think it's very telling that the story, like this, is, despite the fact that there is very clearly a war going on in this book. All you need to do is look at the cover right there. This is very clearly not a war book. This is a book about the people whose lives are affected by the war. We see the soldiers from either side. There's gunfire. There's violence. There is threat of all of those things happening there. But all the while, these are apolitical actors in the wider context of the fight between the United States and the Free States. That fight is not their fight. And I think that's a very important perspective that this book takes through that.
Yeah, it's not about the actual fighting. It is about the people. It is about the politicians in the background and their propaganda, about the media, the role that the media plays, the role that middlemen play, and those negotiations behind the scenes that is not reported in the media, what kind of role those take, and where those actors have different takes. And we've seen that in history too. Like, again, I'm from Berlin, a city that was divided for almost 50 years. And you have JFK holding a speech that he identifies with Berlin, yet in the background, everyone was kind of happy.
Ein Berliner.
There you go. In the background, you have a little bit later maybe, but you have Margaret Thatcher later on, and I forgot who was president in France at that time. But there
was it behind that wasn't De Gaulle. Wasn't De Gaulle would have been earlier than that? No,
De Gaulle, Mitterrand, Mitterrand, De Gaulle, at that time. But again, it's like throughout the whole occupation, they kind of liked Germany being occupied, even though outside they had to play the propaganda game. They had to be like, oh no, the Soviet Union is bad and they built the wall and like we got to fight against them. But internally, like we kind of like the idea of Germany not being independent and one state. So they kind of like being kept down, and you have especially Margaret Thatcher, but JFK to some extent, because yes, when he was in Berlin and his speech was not scripted, he kind of went off the
Saying
script
he
there.
didn't tell the people of Berlin that he was a jelly filled pastry that
Yeah, he
wasn't
didn't say that.
scripted.
No. He didn't. That's not what he said.
Isn't it just like a difference of like basically conjugate where it like it's the equivalent of like you missed a like in French
No,
instead of saying esse, it would just be like
no. This is so the best I can explain this is you are you are taking regional slang and misappropriate it. No one in Berlin calls a Pfannkuchen, that's their actual name, a Berliner. There's some regions in Germany they call that pastry a Berliner, but this is like in the US when you say a pop instead of a soda or a Coke. Like, yet if you call Michael Jackson the king of pop, no one thinks, oh yeah, he's the king of sodas. Like this kind of
those
similar to
jokes have
that.
definitely been made on bad late night talk shows before.
Yeah, but that's the equivalent. Like no one misunderstood that at that time. No one in the audience misunderstood what he was said. People later on like tried to make bad jokes. It was like, oh yeah, this area in the southwest they call this pastry Berliner, and therefore no, all the other conjugation was right. Like everything else about the sentence was proper German. It's just that again in the US would be pop, soda, that kind of like regional differences. But no, he went, that was not scripted. He was supposed to just be like, just, yeah, we might even negotiate with the Soviets at that point. And then him seeing the wall and seeing the people and seeing the situation there. And then he kind of just like got angry at that. And he completely went like this wall is a disgrace. This is the symbol, like this is why communism fails, and so on and so on. He had a second speech that day that he actually went with the script, and he had to backpedal because again they did not want open conflict. They didn't want to provoke the Soviets.
Right. It's the cold simmering detente that it's
And they
theirs.
like it's not us, it's not in the US, it's not in Great Britain, it's not in France. Let Germany be divided, and they kind of like, okay, that's the Cold War. Officially we can never say that, but later on in documents the truth kind of came out. Similar here in the DMZ, like officially they can't say that, yeah, they kind of like the idea of Victor being like, I mean, they shoot him themselves, right? The United States does. And I gotta put my words because yeah, you're right. Like if we say those things and then some algorithm picks AI picks that up and like, oh, what are you talking about? The United States shot this guy. Let me look
yeah,
into this video.
YouTube is definitely going to push this video
gotta,
way down. Even
this
even
is
more
about
so.
a comic book.
Even more so than it's going to be a 3-hour video about a comic that no one is talking about in 2025. Yeah, they're going to pick up things and it's just like United States assassinating its own high profile targets. What? That's not something we're boosting, except on very, very specific sites. So this video is going to get real popular and clipped in like very specific circles that you may or may not want to be involved with.
Yeah. The comic book just for the algorithm.
I'm
But
so close
yeah,
to being done with this. I'm very close, and I still have 5 more.
you don't. Let me tell you, so you don't have to finish them.
This alone tells me I would have a very hard time in the DMZ. There's a lot of other moments where I'm like, hey, this is cool. Like we have like the art scene, the restaurant where they're growing their own food, the club scene where they have like all of those things. I'm like, oh, this is really cool. Obviously, I don't want to live in a place where like people are shooting at me if I'm taking the wrong street, but like this right here, this tells me like I might be a little bit too used to my own modern life to adjust well to the DMZ, because I guarantee you Wilson's Tsingtaos, for how long they've been sitting around, they are skunked and nobody cares there.
I don't know if you would be living in Chinatown, but hey, you never know.
No. Well, I wouldn't be allowed in because that was the whole thing. Is Wilson says that Chinatown is independent.
I know, but Matty was allowed to
well,
come in.
Matty was allowed because Wilson thought he could use Matty, basically as part. Wilson invites Matty into it. Wilson's not inviting me into Chinatown.
I don't know. If you have a press jacket, you might get invited. But
I mean, I've got a jersey with Larry Bird on and some blindingly pale skin.
In New York.
I'm not getting invited.
I'm sure they're all Knicks fans. Anyways, so
I mean,
Matty,
either they love the Knicks for Jeremy Lin and Lin Sanity, or they're very upset for how the Knicks did Lin Sanity dirty.
back then the Nets were still in New Jersey, so I guess that's the free states. I can't root for those. That has changed since then, but
I still,
um,
by the way, any anytime I think of Jersey, I always think of Jersey Don't Suck, which is on the cover of one of the. I want to say it's in Body of a Journalist arc. There's a car on the cover that has those words spray painted on it, and that cover has just like stuck with me so much over the years that anytime I hear Jersey, I always just think Jersey Don't Suck.
Matty, his character arc. So that's actually the three things I think: the propaganda, the politicians, the character arc of Matty himself, because I think he has a very strong character arc. Z, not so much, but I don't think she's supposed to. She's intentionally not changing because she is the exact opposite of Matty, and kind of her counterpart needs to stay the same, morally like embedded in her beliefs, in her loyalty to the people, to the city, and her distrust in all kind of power structures that Matty doesn't have. He switches alliances, he goes his own way, he's being chased by either side for his value, but he also plays that game later on. Again, he starts very naive, he learns quickly what he can and cannot do, becomes like accidentally this celebrity because he has the press jacket. And with that benefit, he becomes an insider in the DMZ, and yeah, is basically the only news outlet that either side has, or not news outlet, the only source of truthful information that he uses for his advantage. That's his card, right? His ace up his sleeve. He builds that knowledge. With that knowledge, he uses his knowledge to get more context, to get better like a better apartment. He doesn't want to move out of that apartment that he was given, even though he tells him like that's not even the best spot like you should be in right now. But he's like, I like the stat. Like she tells him actually, you just there for the status because this crime guy, like
Well,
I
that's
forgot the
even
name,
the second
gave
apartment,
that to.
because first he moves in with Z, just temporarily, and then with the stuff with him, going back and with Liberty, she kicks him out. Then we get, and the reason that Ghost has to happen where it does is because he meets up with them. He gets the apartment from that guy, and then he's like, I can't do it. So it's not until much later that he gets it. But yeah, this whole idea of status and sort of this notoriety within it. To your point earlier, notoriety isn't just something that like is a bargaining chip there. It's something that keeps you alive. If someone recognizes that you are not from there, you're liable, depending on where you're in the city, to be shot at as an outsider. There's certain people who can go certain places, and there are some that can't. Chinatown, Wilson sets up and says, this is an enclave that we can be in. It's separate from all of you. We're basically going to build it up, and we're going to make it the power within Manhattan. We're going to be the ones that come out of this. Similar to the Kennedys buying up all the real estate during the Great Depression. Wilson's one of the few people playing the long game, but he's also coming from a situation where he knocked over the triads and has the ability to do that. Going back a ways, I think your point about Z not having much of a character arc is a good one. And I think part of that is because, I mean, first off, she's not really written as a character. She's written as sort of like, it's almost like she's an exposition dump. It's like she is there to teach Matty about it. She's there to like drop the lore, the backstory. If you're playing a video game, it's like she's the elder that you talk to, and it's like long ago in days past, this all happened. It's just, she's a young med student who's going through there. But in the episode, we get Z's story. We get basically a preview of what it would have look like if the story had centered around her instead of Matty. It's just that happened long enough ago that she's undergone those changes already. She's where she's at, and she is now part of this in a way that Matty is constantly changing partly because of his experiences in there. But to your point about his local celebrity and everybody sort of pulling on him and trying to use him for their own ends, his own experience being warped by what people want from him.
He tries to become a player himself when he aligns later on with Delgado. I believe his last name, first
Parco,
name,
yeah, Delgado Nation.
Parco Delgado, where she's not. So that's why I'm like, yeah, I agree with you. She helps setting up the narrative, but later on, she also takes on that more that those strong values. So she has strong values, and that she does not move away from, because she has a chance to, or actually Matty asks her to. She's like, I'm not joining you in this. Like, this Delgado guy is not up to my ideas of what the DMZ should be like. If you want to play along and be part of this political game, I mistrust all power structures, and I'm not gonna be with you in that. And that's where she kind of disappears, but she disappears for the reason of her having the stronger morals then.
But it's also after, again, just as her being the exposition dump, she's the voice of the people there. And she's saying, we're, because there isn't a government structure, it's almost like the DMZ is a self-governing commune, where the idea is that, there's no official currency, money is still used, but it's, a bunch of bartering where people sort of help where they can. People pitch the trade that they have in order to, sort of get this all functioning. That's the way of life that everyone has come to sort of know. That's their reality. As we're coming out of it, and this is jumping way ahead, but the whole Parco Delgado thing comes from the ceasefire that's announced between the Free States and the United States, and sort of bringing the DMZ into it. It starts with the United States appointing someone who's going to be the voice of the DMZ in the government, and they were like, no, you're not going to do that. We're going to hold a free election. And Parco's basically the only one from the DMZ who steps up as that voice there. And for her, I don't think it matters who it would have been. To your point, the fact that it is anyone who is trying to claim power over that is going against what her experience has been working with the people and what she's come to know. She's going to be distrustful of that.
I'd love to see a version of this that plays in the DMV, but
I would not. I have had enough bad experiences at DMVs that I'm not trying to also add, an active shooter situation where if the desk clerk doesn't recognize me from the last time I got my license renewed, I'm liable to get bullet fire at me. Although it did look like it had some really good tofu there, and I'm someone that loves a good tofu soup. So I'm a little jealous of that good tofu that they got growing up there.
You mentioned the ghosts again. The only placement issue I have with that story is that it's freezing cold. You see the snow; it's in the middle of winter. It is freezing, and the next issue, he's talking about the craziest heat wave. He's even like in his sickness.
Well, in the previous issue too,
it's like he's walking around without a shirt.
In that particular time, you would think that winter is a very, very particular time. So I like to personally believe that during this time, there was a localized weather bomb that went off in the Central Park Zoo. And so only there is it this big blizzard. The rest of the city is completely fine.
Maybe it's a big biotope. They have a big greenhouse. What was the book, Sweet Tooth, where they have that?
Oh, I was just thinking of going up to Montreal and going to the Biodome, and they just have that all set up. I'll go in there.
But that's the only part in that story that was like, where am I? How much time has passed? Because also I don't know how much time has passed in those 36 issues. Like maybe it could be 2 years. But yeah, those climate changes, like it's summer, now it's winter, now it's summer. It's like, is that meant to be, or those issues just came out like very many gaps in between? I don't know.
Well, in Ghosts, so one of the things, and I texted you about this, but I wanted to kind of touch on this here. One of the things that I thought was fascinating about this, going back with my perspective of being a reader in 2025, not necessarily from a political climate, like we've been talking about from some other things, but just as a comic book reader in 2025 versus the comic book reader I was in, I want to say this would have been 2005. It would have either been 2005 or 2006 that this came out, just from like my memories of when I was doing that. But the the first issue of this book, so issue one is part one of a three-part story that introduces us to the DMZ and gets all going on. In today's comic storytelling environment, issue one itself is stretched into a six-part arc. You know, they slow the pace down a little bit after that issue one, where we get to see a little bit more on the ground. But issue one covers so much ground. We see the introduction of Matty going on to the film crew. We see outside of the DMZ. We see the entire concept of the DMZ, the Civil War introduced. We see them on the helicopter. We see it shot down. We see all of the rest of the team blown up. We see Matty go with Z, going around finding out about the DMZ itself. And I think at that point, he makes contact again back with Liberty, and they talk about securing the drop site. And like all of that happens within issue one. And there's such a breakneck pace that it then slows down. But in a post-Bendis world, in a world where Tom King, and I say this as someone who is a big Tom King fan, is one of the top writers out there. That issue doesn't exist like that right now. That was the first part of a three-part arc. That one issue is itself a three-part arc at minimum.
I mean, it depends on what it. I would agree for an ongoing series that I don't think they started off and said, "Oh, it's going to be 72 issues." I think it was meant to be ongoing, not like a 5-part show, because there are stories that are this, like 8 Billion Genies, for example, was fast paced, but they knew going in that it was limited, like a mini series. Any mini series might have a similar pace, but yeah, something that starts off and not independent, but it's Black Label, but it's a new story, new. This could be an image book today, right? It's like this is not connected to anything else.
I mean, that's what Vertigo was in the mid 2000s. I mean, I bought so many of those Vertigo titles in the mid 2000s, and we talked about this, where I was like, reading this just brought me back so many memories. How I want to go back through and like Mike Carey's Crossing Midnight, Testament, just so many. Like it brought back all of the Jason Aaron's The Other Side. There are so many memories I have of like these new Vertigo series that were coming out at the same time that things like Why the Last Man was finishing up, Fables was still ongoing. Like Vertigo was such a powerhouse, and it's like it's hard to overstate the impact that they had at that point of what a new series meant for them when it came out. So to your point, Image is filling a lot of that hole right now with the idea of it's indie comics for the masses, where it's blockbuster comics of non superheroes, where anything you're getting from the big two is going to be superhero first, and then you can have a secondary genre going with there, whereas Image is across the board, but like it's probably going to be big and bombastic, and that's you're exactly right. That's going there, but also to your point, one of the things I wanted to bring up, the last issue of Body of a Journalist, when you were reading that, did you feel like that was, as it was initially written and pitched, they weren't sure if the series was going to be ongoing? Because I felt like that was written as this could be the end of like a maxi series if this doesn't get picked up. Because I feel like I don't know.
Remind me what you're referring to. You mean Victor getting shot?
So not just Victor getting shot, but then the whole the situation with Matty holding onto the footage and them negotiating With the Free State, it's about how someone has to be held accountable. You can't do the invasion here. You got to keep the people safe. And, he's like, I'm going to hold on to this tape. And, he gets his concessions and everyone's like, you did a good job, Matty. You kept the people of the DMZ safe. And it's as much as sort of in DMZ as you ever get with like things tied up with a nice little bow. And
I think it sets things up nicely to show how corrupt the system is, how corrupt the politicians are.
yeah.
Um, wrapping. I don't know if those one shots, because there are a bunch of one shots that felt like they took me out of the story a little bit. I mean, intentional, I guess, naturally. I think they come. I don't know if they come right after or this one. There's also then this part of like just the description. I don't know if this was like just a hey, those are the characters,
Oh yeah.
and
The one that Brian Wood illustrates, and
I
it's
gotta
it's
gotta
basically
admit,
like the quote unquote the source book issue.
yeah, the source book where I gotta admit I didn't read all of it. I read I think the
I
first
skimmed it.
half,
Yeah, it
and then
very
when it
it
got
felt
into
unnecessary. Where it was,
music venues and galleries, I was like, I don't need to know all the galleries.
yeah, like in in a good, and maybe it's unfair because of genre, because like in things like, you can't see it here, but Lazarus, which is right there, Lazarus includes a source book where it gives behind the scenes knowledge of the families that are there. In East of West, you still can't see it there, but I'm pointing at it. There's, the world of East of West, and you get going beyond certain things there, and those are sci-fi, those are like post-apocalyptic western, and in those things I'm more ready to accept that. I mean, this is a grounded story, whereas like in all of those, they're comic books, they're introducing setting and giving you a little bit of a deeper understanding of that. But I don't know if it's just Brian Wood didn't execute on that, and didn't in the way that, say, Greg Rucka or Jonathan Hickman did, or if it is just something about the genre where, like, war fiction, I'm like, that's close enough to my real life that I don't necessarily care about like what's a cool fake club, because like I can go to a real club, versus in this, like, I'm learning about like fake oligarchies and the trade rate and like these different things. Maybe it's just something with the genre, maybe it's something with the execution, but yeah, that was one that I skimmed and I kind of just went through.
Yeah, I want them to show me if it's relevant to the story, show me. Or even if it's not relevant, there's a
100%.
one shot about this
Right.
DJ that's like, if you want to show me how cool this club is, do an issue about it and tell
Yeah.
me in the story, not
make
just
make
like a
that a setting in the
paragraph,
future. And I
200
think,
words. And
and I think the idea is that that's what it was supposed to be. So, I didn't go back and check, but I think the two issue DJ one, that was illustrated by Nathan Fox, um, I feel like that nightclub was probably one of the ones that was mentioned in that particular issue, but I didn't care about that nightclub
yeah,
until we went there and I got to see that story.
even after we went there, I don't think the characters come back later on. I mean, maybe in the second compendium towards the end. I've
Yeah,
never read that
well, I mean,
far, but
that story was fairly close to the end on that.
that's part of the one shot. And as the one shots go, they took me a little bit out of the story, but they had impact on the overall storyline, because we see um what's her face no, Kelly dying in her one shot,
Okay,
which is that took me out a little bit,
that
because she didn't act like her character wasn't really acting how she was described initially. We don't get her too much in the issues leading up to that, other than, oh, she's this girl, she like is interested in the story, then she hooks up with Maddie. But at no point was she this risk-taking frontline. I'm gonna get killed here, and I have my funeral arrangements done already. It's like, where does that come from?
I yeah, I wanted to touch on, as I was flipping through, I was like, oh my God, there's so many things I wanted to talk about. So I'm glad you brought that one up. I felt the same way, where it was like they wanted to flesh out the character, but also didn't plan on using her for anything. And so it's like he had this idea that he was going to illustrate her in this way, that like the reason that she's a war journalist is because she's this risk taker who's willing to just walk through things and just expects that the soldier's going to go through with her, and all of these things are going to happen. I had my own issues that it was like conveniently in the story. It's like, oh, at the same time he's being tossed from Liberty News, this, for a Ricardo Burchielli, drawn character, this smoking hot blonde with a perfect body is just going to drop in the middle of it and is going to be this independent news outlet that'll keep you, going. And Matty's going to hook up with her. And it's just like, it all was very, very like, okay, this is kind of like, it's a little wish fulfillment. It's a little like very like convenient for all of this happening. And to your point, like, yeah, we don't see her for a whole number of issues. And then it's like, oh, by the way, she died. She takes a lot of risks, and she knew she was going to die here. We'll tell you about that. And it's like, wait, what? That's
I felt like she was just a plot device. They needed like
100%.
to get him out of the contract with Liberty, needed a reason for that, and then they needed him to hook up with Z. Therefore, they needed to kill off Kelly.
Yeah, and again, it was. I think plot device is like the perfect description of her. And again, the fact that she is drawn as like the most conventionally attractive person, because everyone else that Ricardo Burchielli does has like a certain like, there's a very interesting ugly character to like everyone that he draws that I really like. And then for her, it's like conventionally attractive blonde white woman with large breasts and small waist, and she's just here, and of course she's going to be Matty's like get out of jail free card, and of course he's going to hook up with her, and she's just going to kind of come in out of the story, and she'll just be there when we need her. And then she only actually like becomes a character when she dies, because before that it's just like, hey Matty, I'm an experienced journalist. Oh wow, I know who you are. Yeah, you do. You want to have sex? And he's like, yeah, I do. And it's like, great, I'll be here the next time the plot needs to advance. And then it's like, let's take a look at who she is, but we don't need her anymore, so she'll die, and we'll tell you that at the beginning. But it was just like, why is any of this happening?
That, and maybe they needed to throw more women at Matty too, because he didn't hook up with Eve, but there's like some tension there, like some interest there at first until he figures her out. Then Kelly, then Z, and then Amina, I believe was her name. It's like, oh, okay, like now you're just sleeping around.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was something like to be said with the whole idea of like the most interesting that Kelly ever was in her issue where it like talked about her idea as a journalist. And it's like, in order to have that mindset, you need to be comfortable with using people for what you need them to be at that particular time. And the idea that like the little kid, she took a picture, like, and she didn't personally do anything, but like hoping that like someone else would do something with, like having a similar, like the kind of person that does that, I understand has like a similar situation with sexual partners, like in a situation like that. Um, but again, that wasn't established. Amina just, yeah, that was all like, I liked that idea that Matty infiltrated like this cell without necessarily meaning to. And of course, when you have Trustwell, when you have Halliburton, oh my God, I keep doing this. Trustwell, when Halliburton's on the ground and they have government contracts and they're performing this, this mercenary work that's all going there, and you're getting all these government contracts, it makes sense that there's going to be things that fall through the cracks, as we saw going on at that time in Iraq. That you're going to have these homespun cells that are going and having their, and I think Amina is an interesting example of like the human cost that happens. And I thought her issue that she had later on, where it's just basically like someone that didn't plan to exist and was put into a life that she didn't want. I thought that was interesting. But again, it's along the way, it's like, yeah, Maddie's our main character, so of course he's going to sleep with her.
But it's also like Maddie saves her, but she doesn't use her second chance. because she was already way gone mentally before that.
Well, and it's, one of the things I thought was interesting and important with that is the fact that like we see their night together where Matty is like talking up to her about like this is the life you got to lead and you got to take these chances, and it's like it's very clear that like he's speaking from someone who, even though he is stuck in the DMZ with her, is coming from a background of privilege where she is someone that's like never had the luxury to think that way. And like she never wanted this life, she never wanted this to happen, and he basically imposed his viewpoint of what her life should be onto her without thinking about what the consequences are going to be afterwards. And that was something that she also never thought, because in her mind, my life exists to end in this function, in this greater good. He denies her that right, and then it's like, well, what is my life now? And there's some growing pains there. And I thought that was interesting, and I thought that was well done. But his whole just like, oh my gosh, it's such a burden to be mad because I gotta sleep with all these women. Is like kind
And
of like, all right.
in a way, they placed Maddie also right in the middle. You have Kelly, who again, the band like doesn't care about the kid, takes a picture of the kid, leaves the kid there, which has a whole different commentary on journalism, because journalists in general are supposed not to interfere, just to record. That's
Mm-hmm.
especially in like animal photography. You see, I don't know, a bear attacking a deer, and I mean, what is the journalist going to do, but photographer going to do, but like something else where like the photographer could interfere and stop that from happening, but it's like we don't interfere with nature. In war, that's a whole different level if it affects humans. So Kelly doesn't do anything. Z would help anyone. Like she's the doctor or the nurse and doctor and like helps everyone. And
Mm-hmm.
then you have Maddie in the middle where he tries to help Amina, but he also likes to pick his sides and kind of like it's not fully there with Z, but it's also not as bad as Kelly.
But also just as, and again, I say this as someone, I need to stress again, I was buying this in singles at the time. I loved my walkthrough. I really enjoyed reading this. And so I need to specifically thank you for hooking me back up with this, because this was like such a pleasure to go back through. But
I'm glad you could
um,
go back in memory lane, back through the Iraq War, and get
I'm
to
not trying to, that's not the memory lane.
no,
I'm
no,
trying to
not
get
the
back
not the
through it.
memory
But
lane. But again,
um,
it was relevant back then. It is relevant now because of other things. Um, the military. One thing we haven't talked about, the military and how they use Matt, because initially they're like, okay, you're the intern, you're going in. Then they're indifferent, like whether he dies or not doesn't really matter. Then they see him as an asset because he's the only one there. He can help them. They send him a laptop and a phone, and he figures out that that's probably bugged. He actually thinks he's bugged, and like until he he pukes his soul out, and someone tells
throws
him,
it
he's
all
like,
in the
"Don't worry,
river.
you
Yeah.
don't have any smart move on the laptop, throwing that away, but you don't need to keep puking because you're getting sick,
Well,
and
and
there's
that's
no
what like
bug, no
Dee told
tracker
him.
in your
She's like, "You're
stomach."
an idiot. Why?
Yeah.
Like, why did you think this was a good idea?"
Then from being that asset, he's a growing threat. Like he's becoming a threat to the US military. And then in the end, he's almost like an enemy of the state because he's lining up with Delgado and kind of supporting that alternative candidate, and the US cannot implement their own. Again, I probably have to read this digitally. I want to read how this continues because I believe that's going to get very interesting if his arc keeps progressing that way in a way that I don't know if you've ever read to the end
No,
to
no,
issue 72.
I actually had only read, I think, because I got out of comic, at least physical comics, around around 2008 was when I started like my period of like, I'm gonna move every 6 months to a year, and I'm just gonna like try out a new city, and I'm gonna try something like and just see what happens there. And like that was like my MO for a little while there. And it got to a point where like I couldn't have physical possessions that like didn't fit in like a backpack. And like I kept during 2008, even when I wasn't living in Vermont, I kept a year of a pull box, and like I got back up there, and they like were like the when I went to the shop, they were like, it was new people working there, and we were wondering who this box was because
Do you
uh
exist? But he's paid probably. Yeah.
well
So
also
they were
like
like, let's keep those here.
well in like my buddy Ethan, when I first opened my pull box, he put my name as Big Bad Ben on that list, and so it wasn't even like a real, and so like for this year that I'm just like not there anymore because I'm not living in the city, this shop is like pulling these books for me, and they're like, who is Big Bad, like, and like Ethan didn't work there anymore, so like they didn't, so I'm sure at some point like they were he was like, oh yeah, like don't, like he's good for it, keep doing it, and then after a certain point they're like, what is this happening? So I came back, like my my friends that I started university with, I came back for their graduation, and while I was there, I swung by my comic shop, and I was like, "Hey, I gotta pick up the stuff in my file." And they're like, "Oh my God, you exist!" And they gave me a year's worth of comics, and I was just like, and I was like, "Yeah." Also, I think I'm gonna close my poll because I don't come here anymore. And they're like, "That's fair."
Yeah, we can tell. We can put another like whole series. We finally have a space for our image book.
Yeah. But yeah, so it would have just been like the first. I don't think the series came out every month, and I might have even dropped. DMZ might have been one of the ones I took off my poll before I left. But I want to say I didn't read much further than Body of a Journalist. I read some of the stuff from there, but there was definitely a bunch of new stuff that was in here, and it was really cool getting to go through that. So it was a mix of familiar, it was a mix of new. Um, and jumping out real quick, how did you feel about the colors in this series by Jeremy Cox?
I I like them. I like because you can tell. I mean, that's the oldest trick in the book, but like backflashes, being having a different color set, color tone. I like the colors. I like the print quality. My issue. So again, the glue doesn't hold up over over
Oh,
too much. I had a
yeah,
few
I definitely
pages
did not have
falling out.
my binding is holding strong right here.
I have that crease here right through
Yep,
the middle
nope.
and around that spot. I have about 20 pages that
Yep, you can see
are
right there
falling out.
the that
So
eye is looking beautiful. Definitely
that's
some gutter
nice.
loss that I had.
I've
Yeah.
I
You
have a
I
lot
mean,
of empty
if it makes you
loose
feeling better, I
pages.
had some gutter loss in this that you definitely don't have. You can read right to the bleed.
I had to take those 20 pages out separately, and I had to like be very careful continuing the next few pages until like 5 to 10 pages after. I was like, okay, I feel good again putting this book down on the tables and keep reading. And it didn't happen again. But it's this one crease in the right through the middle where the glue didn't hold.
So anyway, all of that is to
I
say,
like the colors. I did like the art. I was it was a little bit off-putting to see that change, but in modern comic and nowadays it's normal, right? Every arc has a different artist, kind of.
I really like Nathan Cox, who did some of the fill in stuff. But I do like that for the most part, Riccardo Bercielli does that.
I like the art in the first arc the most. So it
That
starts off
so
with the best arc.
that's my point. So in the first arc, and I talked about how Bercielli draws most of his characters like as kind of ugly. Like no one's really clean. Everyone's a little bit dirty. They're not pretty, and I really like that for this. And in the first arc, I feel like the colors kind of match that. So like you look here, like it's Jeremy Cox is mostly using flats. There's not necessarily a lot of blending. You can see like some clear places where, like in faces, you can
Even
see
no
like
color, completely black and white. I don't know what my camera does here. There is some weird overlay.
it's not even like the choices of the black and white, but it's like especially for the people where like you can see the color isn't being blended. It's like very it's a very specific look. And I think that fit DMZ really, really well. And then as you get further on, I feel like Jeremy Cox as a colorist almost like started getting better. And the better that he was as sort of like a traditional colorist, I think the less it sort of fit DMZ. So like, for instance, like this page, when you look at their uniforms, like the greens that are there, they all kind of like blend in, and there's a few places where you can see the like one color blending, but there's a lot more gradients. You see a lot more sort of like colors naturally toning as opposed to just color blocking. And I think that matches sort of the tone of the book a little less. And I feel like it kind of goes in and out, but I think this book looks best when it looks ugly. And because
like Warzone,
yeah, yeah,
Warzone rough,
exactly. Yeah. Like it's a very specific thing that's supposed to look that way. And I think Burchielli did such a good job with that. And I think for the most part, and especially at the beginning, the colors hit that really, really well. And there's just a few times where it's like, and again, ironically, I think it's because Jeremy Cox got better at coloring that he did like a better job, that it came away from like what the strength of the series coloring was.
Yeah, I noticed this change in, at first it was a change in style. Later on, I was like, is this still the same artist? Because I know there's like the fill-in issues that are completely different. But towards the middle, I was like, is that still the same artist? And I couldn't find that information in there, but maybe that's the colors. Even he's trying to experiment with like day 204, I believe that's the art.
Oh,
where
the
it's like
204
going
massacre.
red. Yeah, where it's like this kind of the red style and the colors being left out, but it's still not consistent. It's more artsy versus like the actual feel of rough, down, dirty. Like this city hasn't been cleaned. Like there's no street cleaning. There's no garbage disposal or like company picking that stuff up. The logistics of it, like this city is run down. It's a war zone. Nothing is being rebuilt really. So it needs to be this color tone, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I agree on that. I will say for fill-in artists, Nathan Fox was absolutely my favorite. I don't mostly it's just because I think his stuff here looks like early Daniel Warren Johnson, who I absolutely love. I don't know that he's necessarily like the best fit for it, but like you look at this page, like like that's an awesome page right there. And it just that looks really good with the thick inks, the uses of sort of like large blacks, the scratchy lines, like all of that. Like, I look at that and I'm like, and then again, strong use of perspective and focal lines coming in with like that. And just as I was reading that, like my first thing was like, was this one of DWJ's early things?
That's what he sent me.
Yeah, and it's not. And actually, Nathan Fox did. He's mostly does fine illustration now, but he did a comic series for Image recently that I haven't picked up, but I'm definitely going to go back and look into because I'm really interested in this style.
Well, since we're talking about art, I guess it's part of art. I sent you that one page. Let me see if this does anything. I haven't seen that in comics too much. I love that idea, and it's such an easy idea and smart. Like it's so obvious that you should do that more often. It's more not the art, but the writing style. It's like the start of the war, but then the narrator bubble picks that up. It's like it continues with which felt like the goddamn Dark Ages. Like that's a clever tactic I haven't seen, but like you have the title or the introduction
the lettering there.
The lettering.
Yeah, the lettering I think is done in a really clever that way. But also like
the narration.
Brian Wood's script, but then also Fletcher's letters there to work for the sort of block letter, the setting type, and then just picking up from there, which felt like the goddamn day, like just going in and very clearly the different letter blocking style. Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was cool.
Overall, a testament to why we need independent journalism um, about media, misinformation, corrupt politics, and potential civil war. So, any final thoughts about the DMZ or about DMZ?
Um, I loved reading back through this. I hated how relevant it still is.
You would think we've come a longer way, and yeah,
I mean,
why
the
are we
fact
back in
that
this place? Like, why are we back? Not even there. Like, we're
the
even
fact
further
that
back than this.
the fact that Radio Free Asia, basically right before we started this, has had all of its funding completely cut, and authoritarian regimes across the region are basically, cheering for the fact that I'm not going to say independent voices because it is funded by, the United, or at least previously was funded by the United States, but it was independent journalism, that was, and again, independent journalism that was going out and basically reporting in areas that reporting was broken down and wasn't allowed for. Um, I, I Information is powerful, and when you can control the information, you control the narrative.
Well, thank you for talking to me about the DMZ today. I'm gonna keep stalking the prices of Compendium too, and see when it either comes back to print or some idiot will sell it for for retail online.
You know what's going to happen. We've got this, and we're going to be looking for it, and we're going to be excited. And then DC is going to announce that they are reprinting all of DMZ in an omnibus, and it's going to be 1 through 72, and it's going to be $175 because of that. And so, despite the
2,000
fact
pages.
that we have these compendiums, we're going to be like, yeah, well, we'll just buy that because honestly, that's cheaper than buying Compendium too.
I would buy an omnibus because the pages won't fall out. Oh, knock on wood, but
Again, I that was not my experience at all with this.
yeah. You're a better reader than me, or I guess my temperatures here and humidity are not glue friendly. But
I
again,
mean,
I don't have any other books.
there's certainly that. Did you stretch the spine on that at all?
No, of course not. You know better. I hope that was a joke. I know it was a joke. Don't stretch anyone that's watching. Don't stretch a glued binding. Um, Maybe I stretched it involuntarily too much. Yeah, that's bad. I even picked up the wrong. I'm holding those pages in my hand right now.
Oh, feels so nice holding it right here.
Nice. I haven't had issues with compendiums.
No,
DC compendiums in the
I've seen
past.
lots of people complain about their build. I've got a number of compendiums, and I think my wasteland might be worst for it. But even like I've never had pages fall out that weren't my son, or actually it was my daughter grabbing my Starman and like having me show it and just rip a page out. But that's life with young kids.
Thank you so much, Ben. BunkmastaB here on Literature and Pictures. Until next time, like and subscribe this video and all that follow.
Yeah, click the thing there, click the thing there, comment down below. Tell us at what minute of the video you were like, I gotta click off this video. This has been going for 4+ hours. I can't be doing that. Tell us what minute you made it to, because that's cool. We appreciate whatever minute you did make it to.
There you go.
See ya.